Adela Cojab. Adela is a third-year law student at Cardoo, an advocate for Jews everywhere, giving countless talks annually to Jews of all ages about tactics for combating anti-Semitism and cementing Jewish pride. When she's not engaging in conversations with Rabbi Wilds or New York City Mayor Eric Adams or hitting the books in Gotham, Adela can be found hosting Today Unpacked, a platform sponsored by Jewish Unpacked that provides perspective amid the breaking news cycle of Jewish and Israel-related current events. Adela, welcome back. Happy to have you on.
Thank you. So excited to be a second-time guest.
Welcome back.
So,
yes, now
we're good, Mayor?
Yeah, no. Yeah, go ahead. I don't. Instagram's not working, and I wanted to do it straight on the phone, but then it creates a feedback. So, learning curves. We're gonna figure this out for the next one.
Not a problem. So, before we jump into it, briefly bring us up to speed on your recent happenings over the past 3 years. I know the last time we spoke was in 2021, and
yeah, wow, crazy to think that it's been 3 years. So, in the last 3 years, I went to law school. I went to Cardoo School of Law. It's part of Yeshiva University. I worked at the district attorney in Queens, the district attorney in Brooklyn, found a love for prosecution. But alas, after October 7th, I actually turned down an offer from the district attorney. So I can keep doing this full time. And of course, we'll probably talk about it, but I sued NYU for anti-Semitism back in 2019. Oh, we lost Isaac.
It's okay. Keep going.
Okay. I sued NYU for anti-Semitism back in 2019, 5 years ago. And now you see Columbia, Harvard, UPenn, MIT, everyone's being sued under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is exactly what I did 5 years ago. So next thing you know, I just felt I could be more useful outside of the DA's office. And I just got back from another talk I did today at high school. I'm doing as much speaking as I can.
How many talks on average would you say you give a month?
Well, I mean, after October 7th, it was a lot. It was like 2 a day. And now I try to keep it to only 2 a week. This is a little bit of an exception. I have 5 this week, and it's in multiple states. I just did Jersey right now. I'm here on Zoom. I have Jersey again Wednesday, then 1 in Mexico City, and then 2 in Atlanta. So it's just like, and I'm still a full-time law student. So I just can't wait until I take the bar, become a barred lawyer, and then can do this without making sure I make it to my classes.
Absolutely.
Good luck. So you've mentioned October 7th a few times. Actually, as of this recording today, marks 6 months, which is kind of crazy to think about. And we have a good friend of ours here in Israel who speaks a lot about these topics as well, more from like a spirituality point of view. And he was saying once that it's not necessarily that there's a rise in anti-Semitism, but it's like a revelation of something that's been there and now it's emerging. Would you say you agree with that, or would you say that it is like a rise in something that hasn't been there before?
Here's the thing. I'd say it's an activation. It's an activation because I think a lot of I think, just objectively, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents and anti-Semitic sentiment. People who had never thought about Israel before in their lives suddenly were given, a day to make a split decision of which side they fall on. And because of TikTok, I think a lot of people ended up on the wrong side of things, or a lot of people who might have heard Israel twice in context of a history class in college, but never gave it much thought, but that was the only interaction they ever had with it. Now the conflict comes up and they automatically already know what side they're on, and it's not on the side of Israel. So I'd say it's an activation, but I don't think a lot of the people who are anti-Semitic right now are truly anti-Semitic. I think they're misinformed. I think they're human rightsers, and I think that unfortunately they're on the wrong end of the spectrum on this one.
How do you parse the difference in situations like these? Where is that, like in your opinion, where is that line between someone sort of intentionally or deliberately espousing Jew hatred versus giving their opinion but not really believing that they themselves actually are anti-Semitic, even though they're forwarding an opinion that reflects that?
I think really you can see it in the passion and whether they're actually drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Even on the man on the street interviews that people have been loving to do during this conflict, you can tell the difference between someone who's there because they think it's a good cause, or there because, you know, they believe in human rights, and the people who really are anti-Semitic. You can tell right away when they start speaking. And what I recommend that you do is that when you start, you know, a conversation, if you're starting a conversation, always start from where they are and then move forward from that point, right? That's a way to gauge how much, number one, knowledge the person has, and number two, how much passion there is behind it. Are they approaching it from a human rights point of view? Are they approaching it from a, oh, well, because your God said you have the land, that doesn't mean that it's yours, right? So if they're taking that approach, then you get to talk about the history of the United Nations, comparable countries that were formed during the same year in similar partition plans. Then you talk about the defensive wars and how, you know, a country comes to be either by treaty or by battle. Israel had both, right? So if any country has a right to exist, right? So it's one of those things where you have to see, well, why don't you support Israel? You get that, and then you can work that muscle. You can need that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sorry, I'm going to get rid of my WhatsApp over here. So this is something that Isaac and I talk about a lot, and I'm sure that it comes up in your conversations as well, is this concept of fighting or combating anti-Semitism when it's sort of something that's out of our control, right? We've tried to educate, we've invested millions, and we continue to invest millions and energy into this idea of fighting something that is like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't care about the truth. It doesn't care about what's happening on the ground. You can show them you can literally show them the evidence, and then they'll say, no, blah, 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 and they'll tell you why it's not true or why it's whatever. So then that begs another question. So how can we really, like, what can we actually do? What is within our control? And sort of a conclusion that we've come to is, and sorry, I just want to finish because it's a question / a comment. One of the conclusions that we've come to is, like, one of the things that an anti-Semite hates is a proud Jew. It's a Jew that shows that they're going to continue to practice. They're going to continue to be openly Jewish, and so from our point of view, it seems like the best way to fight it, to combat it, isn't necessarily to educate and to tell them this is why this is wrong, but it's just to double down on Jews being Jews and learning what it means to be Jewish and the value of being Jewish, and so shouldn't that be our focus in the fight?
Interesting. I'll tell you, I'll answer your first question, then I'll get to your second. So when it comes to, you know, fighting anti-Semitism, what does it mean to fight anti-Semitism? What's the most effective way to fight anti-Semitism? As unique as anti-Semitism is, because it is very unique, it shifts, it changes depending on who's espousing it, depending on the views at the time, right? Are we communists or are we capitalists, right? It changes, right? But at the end of the day, it's still a form of xenophobia. It is. Right. So if you take a look at something, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement to fight racism, there's two components to actually fight racism. You can try to have all the diversity trainings that you'd like. You try to implement it in schools with critical race theory. You can do that. But at the end of the day, people who are not on your side aren't necessarily learning, and people who are already on your side are already on your side. It doesn't really make a difference. So I think in order to fight hatred, it's like the way that you actually fight racism really is by conversations, and by people who are different from each other getting to know each other. So there's two sides to fighting anti-Semitism. One is, unfortunately, very tactless, law, legally. For example, until my lawsuit, Judaism didn't fall under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, right? Until the executive order in 2019. So it's one of those things where you're protecting all minorities, but you're not protecting Jews as a minority. There's a gap in the law. There's a legal issue. So on one end, anti-Semitism on the legal side, yes, we have to keep fighting that 100%. But when it comes to everything else, for example, Super Bowl commercial isn't fighting anti-Semitism. You know what is? After that Super Bowl commercial, when people talk to their Jewish friend that they might have a single one of and say, oh, like, what do you think of that commercial? And they start that conversation. They don't even have to talk about anti-Semitism. You fight anti-Semitism, like I said, and like you said, with Jewish pride. I never thought about it in terms of Jewish practice. Whenever I speak to high school students and college students specifically, and they say something, well, you know, how can we get our Israel club more popular on campus? I make it very easy for them. I say, just be a good, normal person. Be someone you would want to be friends with and approach people in that way. You do sometimes use strategy, but it's not that deep, right? And when it comes to the social media echo chamber, because it loops in, people always say, well, you know, why am I even posting? Aren't I just posting to my echo chamber? You know, when you put it in perspective, there's only 16 million Jews in the world, and there's 1.8 billion Muslims. So if we're saying that, let's say, for example, if only 10% of them posted one video on social media against Israel, that's 180 million videos against 16 million Jews, right? So if you even made one non-Jewish friend that time you went on a cruise, or that time you went on vacation, or that summer camp program, or a model UN in high school, and they happen to follow you, you might be the only pro-Israel post on their feed. So it's one of those things that we are a light, we're a small light, but the darker the room, the brighter it shines. So
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like hopeless, but I hear what you're saying. Like, but what feels like we have sort of gained, and you see it a lot since October 7th. Different people that are saying like, oh, like I want to start doing more. I want, like, what does it mean? What is it? Why should I care? Like, it's not just a country. It's not just a place. This is like a part of my identity. This is something that, right, our ancestors have been dreaming about, and now it's real. And so I want to really figure out what it means to be Jewish. And so, and then they can never take that away from us. They can tell us that the videos are fake, and they can tell us, but you can never take away what I feel on a Friday night Shabbat dinner, or what I feel when I'm in synagogue putting on tefillin or lighting candles, whatever it is. Like, these are things that go way beyond, and right, like, we just passed Purim, and like the whole thing starts when Mordechai doesn't want to bow down to Haman. Why? Because Mordechai is sticking to his values and to his to the Torah that says you don't bow down to a man, you don't bow down to an idol, and everything sort of stems from that moment. So yeah, I just, like, if we want to really piss off an anti-Semite, also, is just tell them, like, you don't affect me. I'm going to be me. That's just, I guess, that's my.
But at the same time, if we're getting very Jewish here, it's true that that's what Mordechai did, and Mordechai's a great leader. But the way that the Jewish people were saved in the story of Purim was through diplomacy. It was Esther placing herself in the strategic position to the point that she saved the Jewish people with one conversation. So I think that there's always going to be multiple sides, right? We can't bow, but we have to understand that we haven't set the rules of the game, and the game has to be played in a certain way. And that's, I think, where I was getting at in terms of the legal activism. Whether or not we want it, we're operating within the legal structure in this country. And if that means that we have to have ambassadors up on the Hill, and we have to have people, pushing forward legislation to just make sure that on the books we're protected. Because look, Ahasuerus can do whatever he wants, right? That doesn't change the fact that Haman and many of his followers are still going to hate Jews. So, like, there's a difference between the people and the infrastructure. Same thing with universities, right? An administration can change policies. That doesn't change that students are being anti-Semitic, or that faculty members are anti-Semitic. So to change a culture, you really need all parts. I think it's important, once you have to get the structure first, and then you can start with the individual. Because if you're not protected from the top, there's nothing you can do. And that's, I think, like I guess, like, you asked, your first question was, what am I up to now? And I think I'm trying to grapple with this bifurcated approach, where I'm about to get a law degree. Am I taking the legal route? Am I advocating for legislation? Am I, going to be suing schools for anti-Semitism with all these amazing organizations that helped me when I was a student? Or am I taking the activism route? Am I pulling a Mordechai? Am I a Mordechai or an Esther? Am I taking on Today Unpacked? Am I growing my social media channels? Am I increasing my public speaking? Still talking about the same things, but is my focus the people, or is my focus the structure? And that's what I have to figure out.
Yes. Isaac?
Yeah. Do you think it's important for Jews to be serious about moving to Israel as a way of fulfilling and continuing the fight against anti-Semitism? And to sort of jump back a second, isn't it the best defense for Israel to become a part of it completely? Is Israel truly the home for Jews, or a place where we are meant to run to when shit hits the fan?
So, unpopular opinion, and this is actually where me and my contemporaries really do differ. I'm a very big believer in the diaspora. I think that without diaspora Jews, Israel cannot exist. I think if every Jew got up and moved to Israel, that'd be lovely. Maybe we'll get, the reckoning and whatnot that the evangelicals are waiting for. But I think that the moment every Jew in the world moves to Israel is the day that Israel ceases to exist. For me, at least. For example, when I went to NYU undergraduate, but when I was applying, it was my dream school, my top school. I wanted to go to NYU more than anything in the world. And once I did get into NYU, I sat down and I had a serious conversation with my mom, where I told her I wanted to go to the IDF and defer for 2 years. And she said, absolutely not. And we got into this very big fight. She just couldn't tell if I was serious or not. And when she did, she was very upset. And ultimately she said, look, go to college for 4 years. And if you still want to go to the IDF, I will personally drive you to the airport. And I said, okay. And I went to college. And lo and behold, I got hit with anti-Semitism left and right. I make the decision to file my case. My case makes it to the White House. I meet the president. He signs an executive order. And now my lawsuit's at president for 5 years later. So it's one of those things that you look back, and if I would have gone to Israel, sure, yes, I would have been in the IDF. I would have been helping. I would have been filling my soul. Maybe there would have been so many things I could have been doing, sure. But here I made a difference that wouldn't have been made if I would not have been here. And it's a give and take. So I personally don't think every Jew has to run to Israel. I think that we should all believe, inshallah, BH, we should all be in Israel, right? It's a hope and a dream, and yes, we should all be there. Am I running off to Israel? No. I think I'm needed here. And I think that I'd love to think of a world where all Jews can live in Israel and Israel can just exist. But I unfortunately don't have that much trust in the world around us.
But it sounds like that's the world that you're fighting for, that you're not. I mean, is it unfair to say that one could argue that you're not in Israel because, as you said, other parts of the world, you feel needed by the diaspora? So so would you agree that that's like, what the degree to which you think this is realistic aside, that's the goal?
Yeah, I mean, the goal, of course, would be for all Jews to be in Israel. But if we don't have allies, then Israel as a country can't exist. As strong as we are, we can't do it alone. And I'd love to say, like, yes, we have Hashem. We do. But we also had Hashem on October 7th. And American aid is critical in continuing the battle, right? So it's really a give and take. And do you think that if we didn't have a single Jew in America, America would be a steadfast ally? I don't think so.
Yeah, and of course, debating or parsing the hairs within the U.S.-Israel relationship might be a separate matter, but just because all Jews would be in Israel doesn't mean that Israel wouldn't have other allies. I mean, I feel like
the assumption that Israel can't handle this on their own.
Well, if we're operating on the assumption that Israel can handle its security on its own without any exterior force, I'd love to say yes. I'd love to say yes. But if I could get a little bit more controversial and just personal for me, I was talking to also a contemporary of mine who was a very strong Jews are Judean activist and whatnot. And he said, okay, well, I understand why you want to be in the U.S. now, but, when you get married. And I said, no, I'm going to continue here, and bottom line, like we got into like this heated discussion. It's not necessarily about the fight. It's that my family's still all here. I don't have a single, I can't do Shabbat with friends every week. That's just not something for me. And even if my whole family, like they say, well, would you want to be buried in Israel? I said, absolutely not. I want my kids to be able to visit my grave as a place of solace. I don't want them to have to take a 12-hour flight. So unless my entire family, which is currently scattered in Mexico, Brazil, Montreal, Monaco, and London, all moved to Israel, it's not the right place for me yet. But I think that generationally, we can get there. And I did speak to again, one friend in Israel, put it in a perspective that I had never thought about it before. And it's actually maybe the one thing that might make me consider Aliyah. She said that, of course, she grappled with the same thing. She's from France. She said, yeah, at 18, I said, am I leaving my family? Am I leaving this? And how am I going to do Shabbat without my mom every single week? Do I have to fly all the way to France to see my family? She said that at 18, she made the decision not to go. At 22, when she finished college, she started thinking about it again. She was applying to medical school programs. And ultimately, she made the decision to make Aliyah so her child would never have to choose between her family and her homeland. And I never thought about it from the next generation's perspective. So, food for thought.
That was a big push for me. And the family part never gets easy, being far from them. But I think that's the only thing. Everything else sort of fills out. Thank God. We're speaking a lot about anti-Semitism, and there was a recent cover article in the Atlantic and the Times about how it's becoming mainstream and whatnot. Do you think it's an oversaturation of the airwaves, or this is like, are they sort of taking advantage of the clickbait in a way, or is it or is it real? Like, living in the U.S., like, is it just basically is the question? Is it just online? Is it just in the news or the Fear Factory, whatever it is, or like are Jews actually in danger outside of Israel?
So that's a heavy question. I actually do think it's real, because and for two reasons. Because yes, so online it's a whole mess. Online it's a whole mess. Anti-Semitism online is raging. That's 100% true. 1,000,000,000% true. But the thing is that online is spilling to in person because of the younger generations that there's very little research on. So like if you do go to these like Pally rallies, right? Palestinian protests, I call them Pally rallies. If you go to a Pally rally,
that has like a ring to it.
Snappy, right? Pally rally. If you go, a lot of people there are older. Maybe some of them are elder millennials like me, but there's also a whole bunch of young people. And I'm talking young, I'm talking 16. I'm talking kids who should be in high school right now in classes instead of in Times Square and Union Square protesting. And that's the reason why I'm afraid, because there's a lot of like the elder millennials come into maybe like college and a little bit after, and if they become activists, if they don't, if they just activate when there's a rally, sure, whatever. But I think that right now all the people who are like 16, very susceptible, they're seeing this happen in real time. So I'm scared for what happens, not necessarily now. I don't think Jews are necessarily in danger now, other than the immediate threat of like you might get punched in the face by someone in New York, not necessarily for being Jewish, it just happens apparently, but also for being Jewish, because it happens to a lot of Jews. But I think that the threat and the real danger is when those 16-year-olds turn 21. That's actually something I'm honestly afraid of. I'm afraid of it. And from one side you say, well, it's just these kids. It's just these are the future workers of tomorrow. These are the future leaders of tomorrow. We already have half of them, not half, but we already have the AOCs entering Congress. And you say, okay, so now it's entering our structures. And right now the squad is what, maybe like 3, 4, 5, 7 problematic people, sure. But if you fast forward 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 2, 3 election cycles, where are we? Where are we? So I do think we're in danger. I don't know if we're in immediate danger now, but I'm very afraid of where we're trending, because tomorrow's adults, I just don't trust. I don't trust.
Out of curiosity, do you believe that when you reference the squad, do you think that the squad, of course, it's I don't like talking about the squad as a monolith because they've each said different things on this topic. Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel like AOC specifically, in your opinion, is anti-Semitic, or do you think that she, like the street interviews we were talking about, has been sort of fed the same sort of narrative that would lead her to take a certain stance?
I think AOC is exactly the person I'm talking about that I'm petrified of. Okay. Because it's someone who's well-meaning, and it's someone who has other aspirations. Her life isn't Palestine, right? She didn't run on the ticket of Palestine. She didn't. But she is exactly the person I'm scared of. And how many more AOCs are being made? And look, AOC, I like, as a Hispanic woman, she's done some things, good things, sure. Placing herself in certain areas that like really like trying to fight against misogyny in Congress. Like I do, I point out, I give credit where credit's due. I also think she's not a very smart person, because if she can let herself get swayed, and that's the hard thing. I think that like people don't realize that when you run for Congress, you have a platform, but your platform, you don't know everything out there. So for example, let's say tomorrow, Turkish and the Armenian genocide becomes like the hot topic, and you have like people from Turkey and people who are Armenian who are all trying to get everyone's ears, right? And you're just a random person in Congress, and you ran on the ticket of food security. What do you do, right? So you go with what seems the most aligned with your values, and unfortunately, Zionism fell out of that bucket. And AOC is exactly the textbook person that I've been talking about.
This I feel dovetails nicely into our next question. So the Jews, many of the Jews in our circles have accepted the IHRA definition, which equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. How has the Jew hatred in the United States that you've observed post-October 7th differed from your experiences at NYU?
Interesting. I think it's a good question. It's a good question. I think that because I was at NYU, which is not real life, it's a microcosm, in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right now, the post-October 7th anti-Semitism I've been seeing is exactly what I was seeing at NYU, which is very different from the anti-Semitism of the real world before October 7th. Before, when I spoke to my friends that would call me up, right, because they knew I was in law school, and they know I do anti-Semitism things. Mainly it was, employment issues. Like they're making me work on Kippur, or, all the holidays fall out on Wednesday, Thursdays. What do I do?
Right.
And I had friends who were fired from jobs because they couldn't work the days. And they said, well, isn't this discrimination against, my religious practice, right? And those were the questions I was getting. Of course, you always heard about other anti-Semitism, but if you remember, like in New York, it was more against like Hasidic people, had nothing to do with Israel. It was, Kanye West saying like, oh, they control us, they control us. That's regular world anti-Semitism. The level 10 anti-Zionism, that was college anti-Semitism. Like that's what I saw in my college world. And now what I saw after October 7th was I saw my college world spill over into real life. And now that's coming left and right. Now it's suddenly my company is doing XYZ. My company is raising money for XYZ. How do I approach this with my boss? My coworker is doing a fundraiser for Gaza, and I'm afraid of where the funds are going, right? That's all issues that we had in college. And now they're in the real world. It definitely has increased a ton. Everyone now has an opinion. People who never thought about it before. And that's what's dangerous. You know what it is about this generation? I call them the Sparks generation, because Gen Z will debate you on a book they didn't read because they watched a TikTok video that said that rain symbolized change. And you say, but don't you think that rain can symbolize sorrow? And they're like, no, it symbolized change. You didn't even read the book. And that's the issue with today. They got the Spark Notes, and now they'll debate you on it. We've been reading the book. Anyway, I digress.
No, that's a good way of looking at it. So a few months ago, you joined, was it a WJC delegation that you went with? Yeah.
November was WJC, and then my most recent one was Cardozo, but yes.
Yeah, so a few months ago, you joined a WJC delegation that traveled to southern Israel and bore witness to some of the events of October 7th, which I personally found, and I found much of your content rather moving on that front. But for people who at this point feel jaded by the amount of gruesome content on social media, what can you share about your experience, and how might it differ from the content millions have been inundated with?
It's a good question. We call this empathy fatigue. You at some point you get empathy fatigue, and you can't do it. Empathy burnout. I'll tell you what differed. So I went to Israel less than 30 days after October 7th. It was before the 4-week mark. So everything was fresh. Everyone was wounded. Everyone was mourning, and everyone was processing. And yes, we saw the content. I walked through the burnt homes, and I heard the stories that they told me as we walked through it about how, Hamas terrorists would throw grenades into a home and then just wait outside with machine guns in case someone managed to crawl their way out, right? But I think the hardest thing for me was after being in those homes in the South, the very next morning, we went to the North to meet with the displaced families from Kfar Aza. And I had already seen it, right? And they were telling us their stories, and they told us about, how they sat in the safe rooms, how they were waiting for the second, for the check marks to turn blue, and then they wouldn't, how they would cover their children's mouths as they heard people shouting in Arabic outside of their homes and the shouts of their neighbors, and how they covered those same children's eyes as they walked them out of their homes because the bodies were still on the ground when the idea finally came to take them to safety. And the hardest thing for me was not only hearing the stories directly from them, but hearing from them right after saying, and we need to go back to rebuild. And of course, I could talk about the inspiration of the Israelis, who the first thing they're thinking about is rebuilding. But I think that was the first time it really hit me that they hadn't been back to their own homes, that I walked through to bear witness to the aftermath of the worst day of their lives. And it was one of those things that I realized it was fresh. They haven't been back in their homes, but I just walked through it with a delegation because now they've become a monument. And it was a hard thing to put into perspective, but I got into, my delegation was only 48 hours. We got there Sunday night. We were Monday in the South at all the kibbutz. Tuesday morning, we went to see the survivors, and then that's it. Tuesday night, I was on a flight. It was very fast. And Wednesday morning, I land at 6 a.m. And what do? I walk into my law school classroom. And I sat there and I couldn't function. That's the difference between a Jew and an Israeli. An Israeli says that we need to go back to rebuild, and a Jew like me comes home to New York to cry for weeks on end. And I think that that's what people are forgetting, right? Even when people ask a question like, well, why was the IDF so slow to respond? They forget that the IDF, the country of Israel, that's who's in the IDF. The same people who would have been called in, like there is no National Guard that can come from outside. There is no Philadelphia and New Jersey policemen that could come to New York after 9/11. Like the whole country were the people who were supposed to be first responders and the people who were taken hostage and the people who are being massacred. And that's like people forget that. I wish that's something I can have people understand.
Yeah. There was a response. It took a little bit longer than people expected, and obviously Shabbat, the holiday, confusion. Hamas also came in. They had IDF uniforms, and they also once they killed some soldiers, they took their uniforms, creating confusion. There's crazy stories of people surviving or not being killed by the IDF or a fellow Israeli because they were wearing tzitzit or they were wearing a kippah, and they were able to identify in the heat of what that was. I was also there a few weeks after. It's really intense, but I was also there last week, and it's, thank God, a lot of life is back. A lot of the people are coming back, like the bigger cities, Sderot, Netivot, and also you mentioned the north. I don't know how north you went, but the north also was evacuated, and they haven't gone back home. And no one's talking about like the fact that Kiryat Shmona and a lot of these cities that are very close to the border in the north are just being shelled. And at least here, it's like it's second. It's not they talk about it, but it's not like, I think they don't want to freak people out. Obviously, also as of this recording, there's been a lot of talk about like Iran and after the strike in Damascus. So yeah, crazy time to be here. Crazy time.
You mentioned how, Adela, when you went with the WJC delegation, you felt, and you were walking through the homes and being told what took place in those homes, that you were conscious of the sort of monument type sort of presentation, or this might like that, what this space, you could see how, it could be on the path to, or was already, being viewed as a monument by some people. Do you think that's a fear? I mean, we're now 6 months. Like, do you think that that's, obviously the delegations that both of you were a part of that allowed you guys to go down there, those were some of the first, but it certainly won't be the last. Is there sort of a historical fear, tangentially, of course, but this isn't the most burning issue, of this atrocity site giving way to, not becoming touristy and trendy, but just sort of being co-opted in a way that's inappropriate, that's being used in a way that it shouldn't be, and not only disrespects the memory of what took place, but also disrespects the people that are returning?
It's a good question. I think so. I was there again, like 3 weeks after October 7th, and then I went back also about last week, so 5 months out. I just got back, and it was very different. I think on my first trip with WJC, we only got to see one quadrant of Kfar Aza because Zaka was still clearing out homes and looking for body parts. So when I say it was very fresh, it was very fresh. There was a heavy IDF presence. There was no one there that wasn't in IDF uniform, full uniform. All the cars that you saw in the parking lot were IDF Jeeps, right? When I went this time, I didn't go to Kfar Aza, I went to Be'eri, and there it was different. So number one, they don't let everyone in because people are come back and it's their homes, but they're purposely leaving one section destroyed. And it feels kind of like a weird ghost town, but at the same time, on the other side, you see people are starting to come back. You see someone walking with their dog, and not like a leisurely, like I'm walking with my dog, like it still has a level of gravity, but it's the question that you ask: do we leave this as a monument, or do we allow people to get back to their homes and rebuild their lives? I don't think it'll be co-opted in a way that's inappropriate, I think it'll always have that sense of gravity. The question is, what's more important, preservation or rebuilding, right? And that's, have you been to the Nova site?
No, I haven't, but
so in the Nova site, they set up some phenomenal. So, for example, number one, one organization, I don't remember which one, planted a tree for every victim. So now there's yeah, and then there's another one that just has like the pictures up, and it's almost like it's a memorial where people can come and, like, you know, put down, like, they hang CDs because it was a music festival. Most of them were lovers of life. And it's a way for people to connect. And when I went on my second trip, I just went on, there were 2 girls that weren't Jewish. And the Nova site, I think, is the first time I really felt them connect. And of course, you know, Be'eri, and, like, you know, they connected throughout, but that was, I guess, like, when it hit them, it was the really the only time I saw them with tears in their eyes. And I don't think it's going to be co-opted in a way that's inappropriate. It's just a matter of, you know, the families. It's hard to put your child on display like that.
Yeah, it's really hard. Well, do you have any questions for us?
I guess a couple of questions. I mean, it's been a while. We haven't caught up at all since last time we chatted. So I know you made Aliyah and you didn't. So what's been going through both of your minds?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I understand and agree with many of the things you said with regard to being a proud diasporic Jew. I mean, I love New York. I view, I love that, I was born here and I love living here. And I think, I visited Mayor in Israel in May, and, between my brief visit in May and since, and sort of through October 7th, I think something's resonated with me that hasn't resonated before, not insofar of like an immediacy of making Aliyah necessarily, but just understanding or not viewing Israel as a cushion for my Judaism, and not viewing it as something that I support, and this idea of sort of Zion, like metaphorical Zionism in a way, where it's like I'm debating these ideas and we talk about the value of the Jewish state as if, because the fight for Zionism now is totally different than it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And one could argue that what we're doing isn't fighting for Zionism because we have a state.
Yeah.
And so in that way, the sort of the quote unquote project in the modern sense of the term has been achieved and completed. So it's definitely given me more questions than answers, but it's questions that I enjoy reckoning with.
Yeah, it's been a challenge, I think, when it comes to the time difference, just very logistically. But in a way, it also really works, at least for me, because I do have a day job here. And I always say, like, by day, I'm trying to convince Jews to move home at Nefesh B'Nefesh, and at night, I am reminding them why they should. So with this work. And I also know that Aliyah is not for anyone, not for everyone. What you say about it being, some of us have tasks outside of Israel, and coming from a Chabad perspective, like obviously the Rebbe never even visited Israel, and he would always say it's because I'm needed here. If I leave, then who's gonna lead them here? And I'll send enough people anywhere that they need to go. Don't worry about that. So, and we know that for sure now. And it's. I mean, living here has definitely opened up so many doors when it comes to career and personal relationships. Shabbos with friends every week is not so bad. And it's not the same, but it's not so bad. And there's just like an energy here that, and Isaac, I think you got a little bit of it, even though you were here for a very jam-packed week.
Yeah.
But there's just this like, these questions of like, oh, what am I going to do at work? I want to observe Kippur or whatever. Like, the fact that it's not even a thought here, and you could just flow with your day-to-day life and your connection to that, to your traditions and the holidays, it really opens up. You sort of begin to think about, okay, so what else can I do now? Like, what else can I focus on now when it comes to my Jewish identity? Maybe it's traveling around the country, and it's such a small country, but you could literally find a new, like, gold, like a little beautiful river or hike or an amazing town. You know, you talk to someone at a bus stop and they're inviting you for Shabbat dinner and trying to set you up with their daughter. Like, that's it's like a one big family that, like, I don't know, like, you just don't get that outside of Israel. And really seeing that this place, like Isaac said, like, it's not just a theory, it's real, and we care. And I just wanted to say, make one point. People here are very emotional. Like, it's not like as rough and resilient as Israelis may seem. It's really emotional, and you're seeing it now, specifically as of this recording. The protests are back, and now it's charged with this push of freeing the hostages. And then the question is, but at what cost? If we're going to free them, how many terrorists are going to be released? And it's really, really hard to look at the face of a family of a member of someone who's held and being like, we can't do this. And so, in that difficulty, we try to find joy, because that's Jewish. That's what it means to be Jewish in a way. It's hard.
So I see exactly what you're talking about in terms of the, so I went to NYU undergrad, and then I went to Cardoo Law, which is part of Yeshiva University. And that's really where I saw the difference between a school that accommodates for Jews and a school that's built around Jews. Just like America accommodates for its Jews, as opposed to Israel that's built around it. So there really is a difference in the sense of home and belonging and stress. Again, like, I don't have to worry about having anything on Shabbat, Kippur, anything. All the food in the building is kosher. There was a cocktail party my first year, right? A welcome cocktail party. And they were passing around like mini hot dogs and things like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think it's the first time I can eat the food that they're passing out at an event like this. Right? It's just something stupid that hits you. And so I was in Israel in November. I was in Israel just now. I'm going back in June. I've never gone to Israel so often in my life, but I feel like I have to keep coming back. So, hey, look, I'm not saying I don't think Aliyah is for me, but do I definitely feel that connection, similar to Isaac, where it's like suddenly it's not an abstract. I feel like I should open an LL rewards account at this point. So I hear that too. And my last question, actually, because it's something that's been so, as you guys know, I'm an activist, and I've been doing activism, these things, and I had a podcast, and my podcast ran for 2 years, but for the most part, my social media was me, right? It was pictures of me and my family and my breakfast and my favorite restaurants and clubs and weddings that I go to. And then after October 7th, I started posting and posting and posting and posting, and next thing you know, I got a following, and suddenly I feel like I have a certain duty to my followers, and at the same time I feel like I'm losing part of myself. So you guys created Jewish Original Media. I remember in the early conversations, even before WJC, I'm the one, we get to do it behind the scenes. I was there when Meir got his Aliyah decision back after he had applied months before. He applied before anything, before I met him. Happens to be I was in Miami, and you were like, they got back to me, I'm going. And I was like, what? So that's a fun behind the scenes. But also, when you wanted to start Jewish Original Media, I said, have you reached out to WJC? So you built this 3 years ago, 2 years ago?
Almost 4. May
2020. Officially as JOM.
Sorry, as JOM.
2 years for JOM.
2 years,
yeah. So how have, as number one, what have you seen change? And number two, has your mission or focus changed?
The mission is the same, is to educate about Jewish history and like, again, remind Jews why they should care. So it's not just an Instagram post about, we always try to contextualize our posts in the context of either something happening now, or like, we used to make a post every day, and then it got a little too much, and we realized like we can do quality over quantity, make sure that the posts that are going out have an impact, are relevant. And now we've opened up this community. This is sort of a new version of the Tutall Jew Show, where we're more collaborating with other creators like yourself, and we hope to we have like a Jewish Jeopardy that we're going to hopefully start soon, God willing. Tours either in Israel or Isaac in New York and some of the more Jewish sites over there. And that's really the next goal, is to go from social media, and you continue to use social media, but more as a channel of distribution and news about what we can offer outside of that space, and kind of have more meaningful conversations. Because unfortunately, we can make a really good Instagram post that will do really well, and I'm sure you know this, but in a week, no one remembers, nobody cares other than you. So that doesn't go away. So yeah.
I agree. I think the first 2 years, just with the On This Day and the Tutall Jews podcast, we were building a foundation of Jewish history content, and so that's still our bedrock or bread and butter, and that's the key consistent through line. But these most recent 2 years with Jewish Visual Media, and a couple of months ago unveiling the community, it adds a strong proactive element to the historical foundation that we created. And so, as Mayor said, it's not only, it's not just about the post that no one remembers. It's using that post and integrating that history and creating spaces and activities that bring that history and the community together in one place, whether it's through a tour or conversations such as this, Jewish Jeopardy, or a bunch of other things. And so absolutely, our emphasis hasn't wavered, but it's certainly expanded in a way to reach a larger audience.
I love that. I'm proud of you guys. So happy I got to watch this,
No, absolutely. What about you? When do you take the bar? What's on your horizon?
So, just, as of this recording, I'm speaking a whole bunch everywhere. Have the New York Law exam on Thursday, take the bar exam in July, hopefully. And then once I finish the bar exam, I'm leaning into activism, which is scary. As you guys know, after I graduated from NYU, I didn't just want to work for a company. I wanted to keep doing what I was doing. So I worked as an activist for 2 years under Maccabee. Which also gave me the mobility and the structure. I didn't have a structure, which is what I wanted at the time. And now it's just interesting that I went through law school, which is so structured, and you're supposed to get your 1L internship and your 2L internship, and your 2L internship gives you an offer for after 3L. And it's like everything. It's like being on a train and then me deciding I want to go rogue. So it's a little bit intimidating to say, what does it mean I'm an activist, right? This time I don't have an organization backing me. It's just really me as an activist. But I've been working a lot with Unpacked. I've been working a lot with, again, other channels. I've spoken for AJC, for just organizations that, like, I haven't spoken to any of these organizations for 5 years, and now suddenly I'm fully in it. And then there's organizations I really believe in that are having trouble with fundraising, and happens to be I'm a professional fundraiser. So now I'm fundraising for a lot of organizations that need the help right now. So so it's going to be a bar exam, and just to have the law degree. No, I can always become a lawyer if I want to, but
not join a big corporate firm in Gotham. That Adela will not be doing that.
No, I will not be doing that.
Wow.
I will not. And even if I did continue on my law path, it wouldn't be a firm. I'd be public interest. I'm always a public interest girl.
Wow. Women of the people.
I've never worked for a for-profit company ever in my life. Other than when I was 14, I worked for a restaurant and they paid me under the table. They paid me $7 rounded down. So
got it. Private universities, but not private companies. That's the
yeah. I just put that out.
No, good.
Awesome.
Plans to stay in New York though?
Yeah, plan is to stay in New York and travel everywhere. Again, this week alone, I'm going to be in New York, New Jersey, Atlanta, Mexico. But yeah, long term, I'm taking the New York bar. I'm planning to stay here in New York.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Nice to catch up with you guys. And thank you to everyone listening. If you want to follow me, you can check me out on Instagram at Adela Cojab. You have to write out my full name. I'm not sure if I'm still shadow banned or not. So.
And how often do you do Today Unpacked videos?
Today Unpacked, usually there's a video every day, but because of the New York Law exam, it's been a little bit slower on my end. But usually there's a video every day, and every single week on YouTube, That's where we have, again, there's a short every day, and then there's a long form video every week, every Sunday. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's my colleague Micah, if I can't make it to record. But yeah, I'm not a YouTube person, but apparently that's where Unpacked does best. So check us out on YouTube.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Adela.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good week. Bye.